It was an ordinary day at the Savannah courthouse, where the air carried the familiar scent of polished wood benches and the worn leather of case files. The soft light, filtered through large windows draped with heavy curtains, bathed the room in a solemn atmosphere. Judge Amara Johnson, known for her impartiality and wisdom, leafed through the documents of a new case, adjusting her gold-rimmed rectangular glasses. Her upright posture and piercing gaze betrayed unwavering focus, despite the faint signs of fatigue etched on her face. Around her, routine prevailed. The murmurs of attorneys bent over their notes blended with the rustling of papers handled carefully. A bailiff, standing by the door, surveyed the room with discreet vigilance, while a clerk typed methodically on a keyboard, recording details from a prior case. Occasionally, an isolated cough broke the silence, a reminder of the muted tension that lingered in this space where every word could alter a life. The courtroom, with its imposing columns and walls adorned with framed quotes about justice, seemed suspended in time. Yet behind this facade of serenity, a latent energy seemed to hum, hinting that this seemingly ordinary day could take an unexpected turn. Everything changed when the officer announced the defendant's name. Amara froze, the pen in her hand hovering midair above the paper. That name, pronounced neutrally by the officer, unleashed a torrent of memories she thought had been buried forever. A wave of contradictory emotions engulfed her: surprise, pain, and a pang of nostalgia she hadn't felt in decades. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, her eyes leaving the documents to focus on the man walking between two guards, his wrists bound by gleaming handcuffs. He walked with a slowness that seemed almost resigned, each step weighed down by the invisible burden of years. His slightly hunched shoulders betrayed a life marked by hardship, and his face, lined with exhaustion and failure, bore the scars of a past she could only imagine. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Those eyes. They were unchanged. They still shone with a familiar intensity, an indefinable mix of defiance and melancholy. Amara felt her heart clench. Those eyes had once belonged to a carefree boy, laughing out loud as he ran beside her through the dusty alleys of Willow Creek, their childhood village. She saw herself again, a little girl with tightly braided hair, sharing dreams of the future with that same gaze, now seemingly so far removed from the innocence of their youth. Amara blinked, trying to suppress the flood of memories, but they were relentless. She recalled the sweltering summers when they explored golden fields, the games that made them forget the constraints of their small rural lives, and the promises they had made under the village's old oak tree. What had happened since then to transform this hopeful child into the broken man now standing before her? The silence in the courtroom seemed to stretch into eternity as Amara struggled to master the avalanche of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, striving to regain her composure. She was the judge here, not the little girl from Willow Creek. Yet a nagging question echoed in her mind. How had it come to this? Amara and Ezekiel had grown up together, bound by a rare and profound friendship that often transcends societal barriers. He, the son of modest farmers, spent his days helping his parents in the fields, his hands toughened by the sun and labor. She, the daughter of a respected village merchant, lived in a comfortable home surrounded by books and the hope of pursuing an education. Despite their social differences, they shared a unique connection, forged in the innocence of childhood and nurtured by their shared thirst for freedom and dreams of a brighter future. Together, they explored the golden fields surrounding their village, running barefoot through the warm earth, laughing as they chased each other through the tall grass. Afternoons were often spent by the shimmering stream, where they floated bark boats and imagined far-off adventures. Beneath the great oak tree standing proudly in the heart of the land, they shared secrets, dreams, and promises they believed were unbreakable. Ezekiel dreamed of traveling and discovering the world beyond the hills of Willow Creek, while Amara aspired to a life of learning and achievement. To their young eyes, anything seemed possible as long as they were together. But their bond was abruptly severed by the prejudices and societal expectations of the time. When their friendship began to draw disapproving glances in the village, Amara's father intervened firmly. A proud man concerned with preserving the family's honor, he deemed their relationship inappropriate and threatened Ezekiel with severe consequences if he continued to see his daughter. Amara still remembered the day her father's harsh words had thundered through her young heart. Ezekiel, though deeply hurt, complied, understanding that his very presence in Amara's life had become a source of conflict. Their final meeting took place beneath the great oak tree, where he promised never to forget her, though his words were heavy with sorrow. Amara watched him walk away, unable to stop him, tears blurring her vision. That was the end of their friendship, but not of the memories. Every moment they had shared remained etched in Amara's mind, fragments of a bygone yet cherished past. Years passed, and the distances and choices of life pulled them further apart, but she often found herself thinking of him, wondering what had become of him, regretting what they had lost to the barriers imposed by the adults around them. In the present, Amara struggled to contain the storm of emotions threatening to betray her role as an impartial judge. Before her stood Ezekiel, the man who had once been her inseparable childhood friend, now upright but visibly weary. He was accused of armed robbery, illegal possession of a firearm, and resisting arrest, serious charges that would be enough to break even the strongest spirits. Yet Ezekiel proclaimed his innocence with quiet dignity, refusing to succumb to the stigma weighing on him. The defense attorney, Naomi Ellis, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a commanding voice, began her plea with a fervor that captured the courtroom's full attention. Known for her skill in dismantling even the most cunning prosecution strategies, Naomi relentlessly attacked every weak point in the evidence presented by the prosecution. Her arguments were precise, methodical, and driven by a palpable sense of indignation. She not only exposed the glaring flaws in the investigation but also highlighted the deeply biased context of Ezekiel's arrest. A pivotal moment in the trial shifted the perception of many present in the courtroom. An eyewitness, one of Ezekiel's neighbors, recounted the events of the day with remarkable clarity. Ezekiel had been apprehended while running in his own neighborhood, carrying a bag in his hand. This bag, seized by the police and presented as incriminating evidence, contained nothing more than bread and milk, purchased moments earlier from the corner store to feed his children. The testimony also revealed that the arrest had been carried out with disproportionate brutality, despite the complete absence of any indication suggesting criminal behavior. Naomi exposed a troubling strategy by the prosecution, an attempt to tarnish Ezekiel's reputation by dredging up a youthful mistake, a minor theft he had committed at the age of 17. Although this offense had been expunged from his record after years of exemplary conduct, the prosecution insisted on linking this distant past to the current charges. Naomi condemned this tactic as a desperate effort to justify an arrest clearly based on racial bias rather than concrete facts. Amara, though deeply unsettled by the case and its personal implications, remained composed, listening intently to every argument. She knew her duty was to deliver a fair judgment, but she couldn't ignore how this case mirrored the systemic injustices she had observed throughout her career. The more she listened, the more evident it became that this was not just Ezekiel's fight. It was a reflection of the daily struggles faced by so many others. Amara sat silently, her face impassive, but her mind churned. The weight of her role as a judge clashed with a storm of emotions stirred by the story she shared with the accused. She remembered the boy she once knew, the one who dreamed of freedom and greatness, and now saw a man scarred by repeated injustices. Yet, she reminded herself that her duty was not to let personal memories dictate her judgment, but to ensure that truth and justice prevailed. Naomi, relentless and resolute, continued dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. Her defense went beyond protecting Ezekiel. It unearthed deeper truths about the racial biases that plagued the judicial system. She meticulously demonstrated how the police, seeing a black man running in a residential neighborhood, had immediately presumed guilt. She pointed out that there was no physical evidence, no witnesses, and that the entire case rested on assumptions and prejudices. Every word Naomi spoke struck like a hammer, resonating in the attentive silence of the courtroom. The jurors seemed increasingly troubled. Murmurs among the audience revealed a subtle but perceptible shift, a collective realization that this case transcended the singular accusation against Ezekiel. It had become a symbol of the daily injustices endured by so many, and Naomi used every argument to lay bare this truth. When it came time for deliberations, Amara watched the jury leave the room with grave expressions. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as though everyone was holding their breath. Meanwhile, Ezekiel remained motionless, his eyes downcast, his hands nervously clasped. He seemed prepared for any outcome, aware that justice, for him and so many others, was never a certainty. After what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreperson rose, holding the verdict in hand. Amara, with professional composure, called for silence, though the room was already hushed. She briefly met Ezekiel's gaze before reading the words that would change his life. After reviewing the facts and deliberating, the jury finds the evidence insufficient. The defendant, Ezekiel Carter, is acquitted. The room erupted in a mix of relieved sighs, muffled applause, and emotional whispers. Ezekiel slowly lifted his head, his incredulous gaze landing on Naomi, who offered him a reassuring smile. His hands trembled slightly as he began to grasp the meaning of those words. His freedom, his restored innocence, though the scars of this ordeal would remain. Amara, though maintaining her stoic demeanor, felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. She announced the conclusion of the hearing with a firm but slightly wavering voice. As Ezekiel was freed from his handcuffs, their eyes met once more. It was brief, but enough for him to offer her an almost imperceptible nod, a mix of gratitude and shared acknowledgement of a past they could not forget. In the quiet hallways of the courthouse, where footsteps echoed softly on the tiled floor, Amara spotted Ezekiel leaning against a wall, his arms crossed, a distant look in his eyes. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, bathing the scene in a soft, soothing glow. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of what to say or if she should even approach him. But something in his expression, a silent pain mixed with an unbroken resilience, drew her closer. Walking up to him slowly, she murmured with a voice laden with regret, "Ezekiel,
I'm sorry."
For everything." He looked up at her, his face etched with the trials he had endured, but a faint, bittersweet smile softened his features. His eyes, which once held the dreams of a child, now seemed older, wiser, but still carried an unshakable glimmer of hope. "Mara, we can't change the past," he said gently. "But today you did what was right, and that matters more than anything. Thank you." Her throat tightened as he spoke those words. He had used the nickname only he had ever called her, a relic of their carefree youth. Before she could dwell on it further, he opened his arms, and she stepped into his embrace, without hesitation. Their hug was brief yet profound, a fragile bridge spanning their fractured past and this moment of mutual understanding. When they pulled apart, Amara stared at him, committing to memory this face, so familiar yet laden with stories she hadn't shared. "Take care of yourself, Ezekiel," she said at last, her voice slightly trembling. He nodded, a genuine smile on his lips. "You too, Amara. Keep fighting for what's right. It's what you do best." He turned and walked away, his figure gradually dissolving into the afternoon light. Amara watched him go, her heart heavy yet strangely at peace. This moment, as simple as it seemed, had lifted part of the shadows weighing on their shared history. That day, the courthouse had been more than just a place of judgment. It had become a stage for reconciliation, a space where buried truths came to light. Amara felt a strange warmth fill her, a certainty that this trial, this encounter, would mark a turning point not just for Ezekiel, but for her as well. She stood there for a moment, motionless, watching the sun slowly decline through the tall windows, and a faint smile softened her features. Justice, she thought, was not only in verdicts. It lived in these moments of truth, forgiveness, and reconnection, even in the heart of pain.